I eat, what do I eat? I must have eaten 8 to 12 tablespoons of fat today. I ate 2 tablespoons of ghee in my fish broth. I had raw butter, a couple of tablespoons in the morning before I went on my hike. I had a teaspoon each in my chapati. I cook in saturated fats, and so I just use it very generously in my life. And I use sour cream and whipping cream, which I ferment with the same culture. So the Filmio culture makes the most amazing creme fraiche. You can get the Strauss whipped cream, you can get raw whipping cream, and it tastes absolutely delicious. So this is a picture of cholesterol, the cholesterol molecule. Frequently, cholesterol is mistaken for fats. But cholesterol is not a fat, it's a sterol, like in alcohol. See that OH group here? See that OH group in red? Can everybody see that? That makes it a sterol, and this is the methyl end. And so the property of cholesterol is it's very unique. It has got one end which is soluble in fat, and it's got another end which is soluble in water. So your cell walls have a lot of cholesterol in them. And because of this theory of cholesterol being bad for you, people have cut cholesterol out of their diets. And when you cut cholesterol out of your diet, can anyone guess what might happen? Brain. Yeah. Your brain is 70% fat, and the bulk of the cholesterol in your body sits in your brain because it's a very fatty substance. It's a very fatty tissue. Cholesterol is the underpinning of your testosterone, your estrogen, your estradiol, all your hormones, your kidney hormones, your adrenalines, your cortisols are all made from cholesterol. And if you don't have enough cholesterol that your body's making, you need to supplement it from your diet. And you'll find that if you go on a very low cholesterol diet, or you eat things that pull cholesterol out of your body, you suffer infertility, hair loss, your skin becomes wrinkled like an old woman's. And when you eat cholesterol, it increases the integrity of your skin. So it's one of the biggest scams of the century that has told us cholesterol is an evil molecule. Cholesterol is a beautiful sterol that sits between your cell wall, cell membrane, within your cell membrane, and it allows solutes to pass through, fat soluble as well as water soluble. And it's a waxy substance. Has anyone seen cholesterol? It's a waxy substance, and it's kind of hard, so it gives integrity to your cell walls. And if you're on a low cholesterol diet, or if your body is not producing enough cholesterol, your cells become floppy. And when your cells become floppy, your membranes don't work as well. And that is the beginning of all chronic disease. So you want to make sure that at a cellular level, the membranes of your cells are very sturdy. And in order for them to be sturdy, they need cholesterol, they need saturated fats, which is one fat that we're going to make today. Coconut is another saturated fat. Palm oil is a saturated fat. Chicken fat is about 50-60% saturated. Ghee is about 60% saturated fat. Coconut oil is about 92%, 95% saturated fat. So you want to have a rich array of saturated fats in your diet. Who read this article in USA Today? Did anyone read this article?
No.
You did? This came out, it was published June 16th, 2017, and it said coconut oil is not healthy for you. And so there's this big buzz. 5 people emailed me and said, Sushma, coconut oil is really bad for you. I teach in another place, and so what do you say about this article? And it is funny that the scientific community, the nutritionists have said that coconut oil is bad for you. And the public, 72% of the general public believes that coconut oil is healthy. But 37%, only 37% of the nutritionists believe that coconut oil is healthy. And so your nutritionists are not recommending coconut oil as a health food, whereas the general public, 72% seems to think that it's an awesome oil. So today we're going to prove that coconut oil is not only not unhealthy, it is one of the healthiest oils you can eat. It repairs things in your body that are broken. It is antimicrobial, it's antiviral, it's anti-cancer. It cures athlete's foot. If you have athlete's foot, eat coconut oil. Toenail and other funguses. Pimples and acne. If your children have pimples, acne, and so on, feed them coconut oil. They will have smooth, beautiful, flawless skin. Dementia and Alzheimer's, often called type 3 diabetes, where your insulin receptor, your glucose receptors are knocked out in your brain. And when you give these people, especially the elderly with dementia and Alzheimer's, you change their diet from a low-fat, low-salt diet to a diet very high in coconut oil, they start thinking again. They get their memory back. There have been some pretty darn miraculous turnarounds in people when caught early and fed coconut oil that have made their brains work better. You can get lice out with coconut oil. If your child has lice, just put coconut oil. If it's a cold day, send them out. The coconut oil freezes, and you take one of those knit combs and comb out the lice in the knits. And it's harmless. It's not a pesticide, so it's not going to give your child neurological disease or cancer. It's used to cure stretch marks. It's a great emollient for women who've just had babies. So it's a terrific skincare product. Warts. Coconut oil kills viruses. It has short-chain fatty acids, and the short-chain fatty acids are composed exactly like some of the viral capsids, or the outer kernels of these viral particles, and they prevent reproduction. They prevent reproduction of the viruses. And what is a wart? It's a virus. So in HIV patients, coconut oil treatment increases their CD4 counts dramatically. So it kills viruses. It's antibacterial. People in tropical countries cook with coconut oil, and they don't seem to suffer the kinds of, fevers and diarrheas. And so it's a very sturdy tropical countries where people cook in coconut oil. Eczema and psoriasis, very helpful to ingest it and to apply it. Thrush. Anyone see babies with white-coated tongues, or if you have a lot of insulin resistance, or if you have candida and yeast infections, coconut oil is a great cure for that. Bladder infections, yeast infections in particular, very powerful. Heartburn, reflux, and digestive problems. It's very easy to digest coconut oil because it doesn't go through the same digestive process as your other longer chain fatty acids like corn oil or canola oil. It is digested through things called chylomicrons, and it's absorbed very readily out of your gut. So it's a very different digestive process, and it'll help with digestive problems. Allergies, ear infections. My mom used to put coconut oil in our ears if you had ear infections, if you've got pressure in your ears and so on, just pour some coconut oil into your ears. Piles and hemorrhoids, very helpful. Pink eye, ulcers, dry damaged hair. Chickenpox and shingles, again, these are viruses for which coconut oil is a great healer. Diaper rash, cradle cap, bee stings, bug bites, thorns in your fingers. If you have thorns, apply some coconut oil, and then you can pull it out very, very easily. Sore throats, it's great for oil pulling. How many people have done oil pulling? 1, 2, 3, try oil pulling. It's you take in coconut oil or sesame oil, and you go for 10-15 minutes until the oil is completely emulsified. Spit it out. You never need to go see a dentist to have a tooth cleaning. As a matter of fact, one day I'll do a presentation on dentists. It is actually bad for your health to get a cleaning from a dentist. So if you have a few spare moments, if you're driving, go do an oil pull for 10-15 minutes, and your teeth will sparkle and you'll not have gum bleeding. You know how many people have bleeding gums? That'll get healed with oil pulling. So that was a short way of saying that coconut oil is not an unhealthy fat. It's very good for you. Its fatty acid composition is like that. I don't know if you can read it or not, but it has primarily 92% of its fats are saturated fats. And saturated fats are very, very heat stable. So for people with chronic disease, they seem to do much better with saturated fats. And you will notice that caproic, caprylic, capric, lauric, and myristic, there are 5 short-chain fatty acids in coconut oil. And these are 6 carbon, which is caproic, 8 carbon, which is caprylic, 10 carbon, which is capric, and 12 carbon, which is lauric, and 14 carbon, which is myristic, which is on the borderline. These are called short-chain fatty acids. So anything with less than 12 carbons is a short-chain fatty acid. And a short-chain fatty acid burns like food. It does not burn like fat. It gets very easily absorbed into your body. It does not tax your digestive processes. It gets taken into your chylomicrons and then shunted out into your body. It can be used as quick energy by your heart, by your brain. So if you have heart disease, if you have brain disease, if you have Parkinson's, dementia, Alzheimer's, MS, coconut oil is a wonderful, wonderful oil to cook with and to eat with. Coconut oil contains primarily saturated fats. Anyone know what a saturated fat is? What is a saturated fat?
Well, it has, go on. The chains are connected and they're full molecules?
Yes, yes, very good. And the carbons are connected, are anchored on all 4 sides. So these fats are made from 3 atoms, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And there's a skeleton of carbon chains in between, and it's surrounded by hydrogen, and on one end there's hydroxyl group, oxygen, and an OH group. And in a saturated fat, the carbons are anchored on every side, and those are called single bonds. And when they're anchored on all sides, it's very hard to pull them apart. So it's a very stable oil. You will find that if you take fish oil, it goes bad very fast, and coconut oil will last for 2 years. That's because it's a saturated fat. And that's very, very important because your body needs fats that are not going to go rancid. Because the other fats that have double bonds where the carbon links are weak, they are unsaturated fats, and those fats go bad fast. And when fats go bad, they create a lot of damage inside your body. And think of them as daggers in your arteries and veins. Daggers that cause oxidative stress because the links between the carbons are weak, and they're always trying to go marry another hydrogen or oxygen, and that's called oxidation. So they get oxidized very easily. So coconut oil is very, very good for you. It's an ancient, traditional, healthful, cardioprotective, hepatoprotective, protects your liver, and anti-infective fat. So there'll be a lot of articles you'll see on cholesterol bad, coconut oil bad, but you guys are going to be the survivors in a world that does not eat coconut oil or cholesterol. In fact, as recently as January 3, 2017, a study came out linking heart disease to saturated fats. This came out of Harvard University, the T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and what they're saying is they're reasserting their dietary guidelines and saying try and don't eat saturated fats, eat unsaturated fat. And we're going to spend this whole evening proving why this thesis is wrong. And when you go out, you will have these PowerPoints, you'll have these this research, and you can quote it to people and say, hey, there's actually almost no relationship between heart disease and saturated fats. Saturated fats protect the heart. Saturated fats prevent heart disease. They prevent brain degeneration. They're very good for your epithelial tissue, and they give you good life. There's an oil called palmitic oil, and it is present in an oil that you can buy in the market called palm oil, which is red colored. Has anyone seen that?
Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty delicious. You can cook in it. It's a lot like coconut oil. Its formation, its formulation is largely saturated, but the key oil in it is a saturated 16 carbon acid called palmitic acid. If you have lung disease, if you have respiratory disease, palmitic acid is very important. If you have a child with asthma or bronchitis or an elderly person with pneumonia, palmitic acid is one of the primary components of the cell walls of your lung tissue. So if you have colds, coughs, respiratory infections, cook your eggs in palm oil.
Now, what about they're harvesting so many palms, and
They're not ethically harvested.
right.
Yes.
What do you do about that?
You should not purchase those. So you want to purchase oils and fats from sources that you know, where you know they have not, extorted it out of the people. And there are lots of plantations that do, but you'd have to go find them. And I would say, as much as possible, eat locally. What grows over here? Which fat grows here?
Olive oil.
Olive oil. There's another fat that grows. There's another fat that grows here.
Animal
Fat, yeah. Butter. Yes. Marin is famous for butter. I think it has the best butter in all the United States. No one can make fake butter. You taste it and you can make ghee out of it. So I would go with local fats that are simply awesome. And they've been made under non-GMO organic conditions. We've got all sorts of pasture land here. And the butters, I buy butter in about early spring, when the cows are eating green grass, and the butter is bright yellow. It's a bright yellow. That's when you want to buy your butter and keep it or make ghee or something. So I would say go with local fats, but coconut oil is great, palm oil is great. But the story for palm oil is they took the modern epidemic of lung disease is so related to polyunsaturated fats. They actually did an experiment in a hospital with sick people who had pulmonary disease, or they wanted to try this diet on people with respiratory disease. So they tried this on pigs. Pigs are a lot like humans, they're mammals. 3 groups of pigs, 6 pigs per group. They had 20% protein in their diet, 20% calories, and 40% of their calories were fat, but they changed up the fats for the 3 groups. One group got palmitic acid, which was a saturated fatty acid with 16 carbons. One group got intralipid, which is linoleic acid, which is a polyunsaturated fat, and it has 2 double bonds. And one group got fish oil, which has many, many double bonds, so it's much more fragile. They were on this diet for 21 days before the experiment, and they determined their cardiovascular and pulmonary functions on day 22. They put poisons, endotoxin, into the pulmonary artery, into the lung artery, until the pressure reached a pressure similar to that found in trauma victims. And what did they find? The animals were killed and their lungs were observed. And let's see what they found. In groups 2 and 3, there were significant increases in lung wet-dry weight ratios, increased CO2 retention, much more vascular congestion, much more edema, which is swelling in their lung tissue, poor surface tension. Lungs need to have tissue with a high surface tension. And the alveolar walls had thickened considerably compared to the palmitic acid group. And the increased unsaturated fatty acids reduce the surfactant, so they're like soap. The unsaturated fatty acids, they're like soap, and they reduce the surface tension on the lungs, leading to faster lung collapse in trauma victims. So the common practice of providing calories in the form of polyunsaturated fatty acids to critically ill patients actually carries the risk of being detrimental to their lung function. So in a hospital today, they're giving them polyunsaturated fats to trauma victims, and their lung conditions are actually worsening. They should be getting palmitic oil. And so there are a lot of these, which is why there's a lot of hospital deaths, you know. But there's a lot of these preconceptions, and there's not enough science that's read by doctors, and there's too much following of a food pyramid that is not based in real science. So if you ever have a lung infection and are admitted to hospital, reject the hospital food and take a bottle of palm oil with you and eat it. The fats that are good are traditional sacred fats. Fats like raw butter, raw cream, lard, tallow. These are all rich in fat-soluble vitamins. The big difference between, anyone know the difference between an animal fat and a plant fat in terms of vitamins?
Animal fat may be higher on.
Yes, yes. Animal fats contain fat-soluble vitamins A, D, K, and E, and plants contain only A. Palm oil is orange colored, but that's not vitamin A, that's beta-carotene. And beta-carotene goes through 19, 20 enzymatic steps before it gets turned into vitamin A in your body. And so for people who are not able to, or don't have those enzymes, or have poor metabolism, it's hard to get vitamin A from carrots or palm oil. So I would recommend saturated animal fats be a good portion of your diet. The other thing is I see a lot of people eating olive oils, and olive oil is sort of this in-between thing where it's not quite as tasty as butter, and people are afraid of eating butter, and so they say, okay, this is a compromise, I'll eat olive oil, at least I'm not eating corn oil. Well, guess what? The production of olive oil worldwide is a lot less than what you see in the stores. There's a lot of adulteration in olive oils, and the UC Davis did a survey, an analysis of olive oils. 80% of the olive oils that you, in-store brands that you see, are fake. And fake means they're very likely polyunsaturated oils that are adulterating a tiny bit of olive oil. And polyunsaturated oils are very, very toxic to your health. And we'll find out why in a second. So if you walked out right now because you don't want to hear all the science and the experiments, the thing to remember is eat your butter. Cholesterol is very good for you. Eat ghee. Eat coconut oil, eat whipping cream, eat from high quality sources. Think of your fats as medicine. Let it come out of your medicine budget. I pay $20 a gallon for raw milk, and if my farmer wanted $50 a gallon, I'd probably pay it, because to me it is medicine. It cured my asthma, it cured my partner's joint disease, and these are miraculous, magical foods. How did we get into this pickle? So in the 1970s, the US government came out with its very first food pyramid, dietary guidelines. And prior to this, you will note that the obesity rate in the US was between 10 and 15%. And what happened between 1976 and 1980 was the first food pyramid came out, which said, you shall have 6 to 11 servings of rice, pasta, bread, cereal, and other carbohydrates. You'll have 2 to 4 servings of fruits. You'll have 2 to 3 servings of meat, poultry, and such, and use your fats sparingly. This pyramid is upside down, because previous to this, Americans did not eat like this. Americans ate healthy amounts of fat. They ate meats and proteins and vegetables, and smaller amounts of carbohydrates. When this food pyramid came into being, our schools, our hospitals, our jails, government cafeteria, anyone that wanted any kind of public funding was forced to abide by these food pyramid guidelines, and we had an epidemic of obesity that carries on to this day. 30 to 40, almost 50% of the population today is overweight or obese. And in the last year, new guidelines came out that they did not address the saturated fat issue. And you might think that it only happened to a certain section of the population. No. These guidelines affected the under the 18 to 29-year-olds, obesity went through the roof. 30 to 44-year-olds, weight gain went through the roof. 45 to 60-year-olds, and then 65-plus-year-old people, it just went through the roof. In any kind of senior centers, hospices, this is the kind of food that's served, and it has been very, very deleterious, especially to our children and the elderly who are forced to eat food that's fed to them in public settings. In this new food pyramid, guess what changed? This is the absolute amounts of grams that people started eating between 1971 versus 2000. And so what happened was carbohydrates went up 70%, almost 70%, 67.7%. Protein stayed about the same. Fats in aggregate went down about 5%, and saturated fats went down almost 45%. So folks, it's not the saturated fats which is causing the epidemic of cancer and heart disease today.
Is it lack of them?
It's the lack of them. It's the lack of them. You cannot prove that saturated fatty acids protect you from cardiovascular disease and cancer, but what you can prove is that they did not cause it. And the cancer and heart disease epidemic has gone through the roof. What increased in the last 40 years is carbohydrates in our diets. What we did was we displaced and replaced the saturated fats with two things: carbohydrates and polyunsaturated fats. Polyunsaturated fats are not what your body needs to have good cellular function. And so the key facts to remember here are: eating fat does not make you fat. Eating carbs makes you fat. Saturated fat does not cause heart disease or cancer. What you want to avoid is all processed foods that are labeled light, low fat, low cholesterol if you want to have good health. Eat eggs without fear. Each egg has 220 milligrams of cholesterol, and that's very good for you. Saturated animal fats have cholesterol, and it's very good for you. You want to limit your starchy and refined carbohydrates in order to reverse diabetes, insulin resistance, and inflammation. If you have any chronic disease, you will find that if you reduce the carbohydrates and increase the saturated fats a little bit, you will feel better. You'll lose a little bit of weight, you'll gain a little bit of muscle, your gut will feel better, you'll have less acid reflux, you'll just feel better. Your brain will work better, you won't be as foggy-headed. You want to eliminate all refined sugars, all refined flours, all refined fats, and all refined milk from your diet. The pasteurized homogenized milk is a very refined form of milk. It's not milk anymore. The refined fats are not really fats anymore. They're a sort of a manufactured junk industrial fat. Refined sugars, of course, everybody knows about. You want to replace all your salt with sea salt that is unrefined, because you need the 60 to 80 trace minerals that are present in sea salt. Can we walk around the room and say who eats what kind of salts? Start with you, perhaps.
Real salt and sea salt from Brittany.
Awesome. What sort of salt do you eat?
What's it called? The pink Himalayan.
The pink Himalayan.
Yeah.
How about yourself?
Himalayan and the sea salt, Celtic.
Okay.
Same.
The same. How about yourself?
The one that you suggested.
Okay, okay. How about you?
The same thing, Celtic and the Himalayan.
Okay.
Just different more salts, I find.
Same, pink and gray.
Pink and gray. Pink and gray. Okay, you guys are awesome. And if there's one change I'd ask you to make in your diet, it is to ditch all refined salts, replace them with a $3 to $6 a pound unrefined salts, which contain all the trace minerals you need to make enzymes. All your metabolic, all your digestive enzymes contain trace minerals and trace elements. Without these, your health goes downhill very fast. And so unrefined salt and saturated fats are sacred foods, in my opinion. Every time I go around the world, I will buy their local unrefined salt. So I'm like a squirrel. I collect salts from all over the world, and I'll use them in different dishes and on different days. And you're going to get different kinds of minerals from those salts. It's very, very critical.
Can I just ask you something? So you read a lot about salt and the oceans and the pollution, and they're saying it's not that good to eat that. I mean, so what salt? What is there a certain brand that you use that you're not?
I use the Redmond salt. I use Celtic salt. I'll use Balinese salts, Hawaiian salt. Any salt that's been harvested from relatively clean oceans. Now we know that oceans contain all sorts of stuff, but relatively clean, but they also manage to clean up. There are bacteria and algae in the ocean that clean up toxic products in the ocean, toxic sludge that humans put into the ocean. So by and large, if you get them from a clean area, those are pretty good salts.
Well, iodine.
Iodine is wonderful for you, and there's iodine in unrefined sea salt, there's iodine in seaweed. So if you increase your seaweed consumption, go to the beach and stick your feet in the water, you'll get iodine, magnesium. It's not just fun and games, you're getting real minerals in the water. And the water in Stinson Beach, and we're very lucky to have this ocean next door to us. So take the time to go every few weeks to the ocean and just hang out, just walk in the water, and you will get a lot of minerals, and you'll get grounded too. So ample sea salt. When you make kraut juices and congees and apple cider vinegar, you're getting minerals. And if you have fats and if you have minerals in your body, you're going to be a very healthy person. Everyone drink apple cider vinegar and know what that is. You can get the Bragg's apple cider vinegar, the Farmer's Smart, but buy the unpasteurized kind with the live bugs and yeasts in it. This is a picture of foie gras. These are ducks, wild ducks, that gorged on seed and grains. In season, ducks will go to farms or come here, find seeds, and go hog wild on seed and grains, and that's what their liver looks like. And that is a fatty liver. That's what our livers look like on a 66% or 66-gram carbohydrate diet. It is not fats that give you a fatty liver, it is carbohydrates that give you a fatty liver. This is the same duck during the lean season. When there's no seeds and grain, come winter time, that's what the liver turns to. This is when you harvest it to make foie gras. Now this is a wild duck, but this is the same process followed by farmers to make fatty liver in ducks to make foie gras. And that is, what do they put down their gullets? Anyone know?
Grain.
Grain. So ducks grow fatty liver on grain, and likewise in the United States and all of the Western world, as a matter of fact, we have an epidemic of fatty liver from eating too many grains, too many refined carbohydrates, too much high fructose corn syrup that turns your liver into fatty liver, and that starts the cascade of metabolic disease. And so the ducks eat seeds and grain, and what is the American daily intake? We eat 266 grams of carbohydrates daily. 80 grams of protein, 80 grams of fat, and that is what we're doing to ourselves. That is exactly what we're doing to. For the people who can't see it in the back, there's a woman strapped to a chair and someone's pouring Cheerios down a funnel into her gullet, much like a duck.
So is there any kind of bread that would be better? I mean, any kind of grain that you could consume that is better for you? Or
Whole grain, not refined grains, not highly ground grains. grains with the kernel of the seed would be a lot better. But my sense is most people are eating more carbs than they should be eating because they need the energy. They're afraid to eat the saturated fats. The corn oil tastes terrible, and so it's carb city. You have permission to eat butter. You have permission to eat tallow, whipping cream, and these are such satisfying foods that you will need a very thin slice of bread with a very thick slice of butter, and that will satisfy you. In fact, when I eat bread and butter, my bread is very thin, and my butter is about half an inch, quarter inch, half an inch thick, and it keeps me very happy, and my brain functioning for many hours. Our ghee is birdling. I recommend using ghee, lard, tallow, coconut oil, palm oil, or any saturated fats to cook with. Why? Take a guess. Why would you cook with a saturated fat?
It's more stable.
It's more heat stable, absolutely. It's
You
much
can reuse it.
Hmm?
You can reuse it. Like
It
in New
is.
Zealand, we used to do fish and chips, and you always use the same beef fat all the time. You just
Exactly. Yeah.
scrape off the stuff.
Exactly. And McDonald's fries used to be made in tallow, and then some activists said, no, that's bad for your health, and they started cooking it in corn oil, soybean oil, trans fatty acids, which are just terribly damaging to your heart. So cook with your saturated fats. You can reuse it without spoilage. It keeps a lot better, and it's way tastier and way healthier for you. So this is what we're doing to our civilization today, and do it over many decades. This has been going on since the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000, we're in almost 2020 now. People have been eating high carb diets plus drugs over many decades and many generations, and you're going to have an epidemic of diabetes. You're going to have an epidemic of heart disease and cancer. And the fundamental problem is all these people were inherently healthy. This need not have happened. If you'd only stuck to a stick of butter, you'd have had good health for the last 50 years, or your ancestors. Our ancestors ate awesome food. Look at this man, the high cheekbones, the dental arch. American Indians had a lot of fat in there. When they killed moose, they ate the fat back first. Meat was the least favorite part of an animal that was eaten. They preferred the fat back, the liver, the organ meats. When a lion kills its prey, it goes for the liver first, the heart second, all the organ meats, which are very rich in fats and very rich in other metabolites, other important minerals. So these folks ate caribou, they ate elk, they ate fish, they ate nuts, seeds, they ate the fat back, but they primarily ate saturated fats. And this is what you have on reservations today. These kids are eating refined sugars and refined fats, and they're calling it genetic, but it's really an environmental epidemic. So what does carbohydrate do? What it has done is sort of like an iceberg. I like to think of it as an iceberg where at the top you will see slight fatigue, you'll see slight fogginess, you'll see joint pains, or you'll see some cramping when you have your periods. But underneath there's a giant iceberg of disease that's brewing there, and carbohydrates are probably the single largest cause of coronary artery disease, stroke, polycystic ovary syndrome. People who go on a high-fat diet become fertile. They start having babies from being infertile. Chronic joint pain, inflammation, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, neurological mental cancers. A lot of cancers are promoted or become motivated stimulated by high sugar or high carbohydrate diets, especially breast, colon, liver, pancreas, kidney. Skin and limb infections, yeast infections, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. This is the sort of cirrhotic liver, the fatty liver you saw in that duck. That's what's happening to us. Insulin and leptin resistance, high uric acid in your blood. Your small dense LDL particles go up in quantity, and you get endothelial damage, which is the inner lining of your arteries gets damaged from an overabundance of carbohydrates in your diet and a low amount of saturated fats. And what we have today is a cluster of diseases. So they call it high blood pressure, insulin resistance, elevated blood glucose level. You have inflammatory markers, you've got joint pain, digestive problems, Hashimoto's, thyroid disease, pancreatic disease. So these are different autoimmune type diseases, high LDL. And it eventually leads to insulin resistance, which leads to type 2 diabetes, which is the fundamental cause of cardiovascular disease. So it's literally one food group that has brought about a demise in good health for a lot of people. And it's very easily changeable. It's very easy to change it. I still find it interesting. I talk to certain groups, and I'll do 3 or 4 of these lectures, and I'll have someone coming up to me and saying, Sushma, it's I know you said eat butter, but when I'm on my second spoon of butter, I feel guilty. So we've been so indoctrinated since the 70s into not eating fats, we are still afraid. And what I would say is don't be afraid of fats. Fats are very good for you. If you're on a high-fat diet, see those gray, brown marks? A lot of people have these spots on their body, and a lot of these are glycated sugar end product, advanced glycation end products. And those go away on a ketogenic diet, on a high-fat diet. And this is a before and after picture. Weight loss on a high-fat diet. People who go on ketogenic diets, possibly with intermittent fasting, has a very good effect on your, body composition. And there's a reason why. There's a reason for that. When did the modern epidemic of heart disease start? The first myocardial infarction was diagnosed in 1921. It was first recorded in 1921. In about 1914, Crisco was invented. Crisco is an industrial trans fatty acid. And it's funny that Crisco came out in 1914. It was made from cottonseed oil. And the reason they made it was electricity was invented, and there was a glut in lamp oil. People used to light their homes with lamp oil and streets with lamp oil. And all of a sudden, cottonseed oil was abundant. And Procter & Gamble said, oh, what do we do with it? Let's make this industrial trans fatty acid out of it. And that was Crisco. Women, housewives, grandmothers were pressured into using Crisco as the new modern oil in that era, and a lot of them succumbed to that pressure. In 1930, there were 3,000 deaths from myocardial infarction in the US. By 1960, 500,000, and today it is the leading cause of death in the United States. And we're primarily using vegetable oils as our fats. So saturated fats are not causing this heart disease. In the early 1900s, all the way through the 1950s, there's a lot of propaganda on cholesterol and fat. And what they thought was that too much cholesterol and too much saturated fats are bad for you because they increase your blood cholesterol levels. And when the blood cholesterol levels are increased, that increases your built-in plaque in your arteries, and that causes coronary heart disease. The problem was there was no evidence that cholesterol and saturated fat in your diet caused heart disease. They did a rabbit study. Rabbits are vegetarians, and they fed rabbits a lot of cholesterol, but rabbits are not human beings, and they developed atherosclerotic plaque, and from that they said if you feed humans cholesterol, then their arteries get clogged with cholesterol, and that leads to heart disease. But there was never any evidence. To the contrary, there was a lot of counter evidence, and we'll go through that. There was a study by a couple of scientists called Landy and Perry in 1936 that looked at this was at thousands and thousands of dead people who had died from heart disease. So they did autopsies, and they had determined their cholesterol levels, and they compared it to the atherosclerosis, and you will notice that the cholesterol levels go from 100 to 400, and the sclerosis of the arteries is all over the. If there was a relationship between serum cholesterol levels and heart disease or coronary artery sclerosis, this would have been a straight line going that way. And these were people that died from heart attacks. So high blood cholesterol leading to arteriosclerosis is a false precept. There is no evidence that states that high blood cholesterol leads to arteriosclerosis, because as you can see, there were people with 350 cholesterol with 100 in atherosclerosis, and there were people with 150 cholesterol levels or 200 cholesterol levels with 1,000 milligrams of arterial sclerosis. So there's almost no correlation. So what are fatty acids? Fatty acids are made of carbon chains, and there are different types of fatty acids. So when someone says, oh, olive oil is a bunch of these different types of fatty acids. There are some 18 carbon fatty acids, there are some 14 carbon. So no oil is one type of fatty acid. So most oils are made from many, many different types of carbon chains, but the oils that are liquid at room temperatures are typically polyunsaturated or have many double bonds between them. Whereas the oils that are solid, or fats that are solid at room temperature, tend to be more saturated. So going all the way from acetic acid to arachidonic acid, you have a 2-carbon fatty acid, all the way to 20 carbon fatty acids like arachidonic acid, which your brain has. So your brain has very long chain fatty acids in it, but it makes them on its own from other fatty acids. But what you will see is all of these acids, fatty acids, have carbon, the carbon molecule. They either have a double bond or a single bond between them. A double bond means they're fragile. That means they can go rancid easily. So linoleic acid has 2 double bonds. That means it's more fragile than lauric acid, which has 0 double bonds. And we abbreviate them by saying 2-0, meaning this has acetic acid has 2 carbons and it has 0 double bonds. And that's sort of the nomenclature, so that you're familiar with your fatty acids. And these different fats are made by different plants, by different animals, by different bacteria. You will notice that acetic acid is made from bacterial metabolism. Acetic acid is the fatty acid that bacteria make in your colon, that's made from fermented foods. Bacteria make acetic acid. Butyric acid is butter fat. It is a 4-carbon fatty acid that's very rich in butter and ghee, and it's very antimicrobial. It's a saturated fatty acid that's very short chain, very easy to digest. Caproic acid is in goat's milk. Caprylic acid is in goat's milk. These are 6 and 8 chain carbons. Lauric acid is present in coconut oil. That's a 12-carbon fatty acid. And these are wonderful for your health, and they get digested very easily into your alimentary canal. Carbohydrates look like this. Carbohydrates are rings that are made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. At its simplest, the simplest carbohydrate is glucose. A glucose and a sucrose make a table sugar. Glucose and a fructose make sucrose, which is your table sugar. And then these are your breads, your pastas, your rice. These are simply long chains of glucose. So when you eat a carbohydrate that is very refined, within 5 minutes it can go into your bloodstream and turn into pure sugar. And can anyone guess how much sugar the body permits in your bloodstream?
What do you mean? That's what you should
How much glucose is present in your entire bloodstream? Anyone take a guess?
20 grams.
You're close. 1 teaspoon, your entire body, it is the most tightly controlled substance in your bloodstream. Your body cannot have more than about a teaspoon of glucose. So by the time you've eaten 2 slices of bread, a little bowl of pasta, some rice, and you're not burnt it off, where does all this glucose go? There is a emergency in your circulatory system. Insulin is released from the pancreas to mop up the glucose, and if you're not running a marathon, that glucose gets stored into fat.
Can you say that one more time?
Your body has a teaspoon of glucose at most, and it controls very tightly for glucose levels that go down below that, and above that, insulin, a hormone that's released from your pancreas, mops up all the glucose and then takes it to the different organs. Your brain sucks up some glucose because your brain takes up 25-30% of your energy. Your heart takes up some glucose, your kidneys, your muscles, but at some point it runs out of places to give the glucose to, and then it gets turned into fat. So that's the role of insulin in your body. And when you have a surplus of carbohydrates and an insufficiency of fats, your insulin kind of runs amok. Your insulin levels are constantly high, and insulin stimulates cancer. Insulin is a pro-inflammatory hormone. Insulin is a growth hormone. It's an anabolic hormone that builds muscles. So little children need a lot of insulin to grow, but when you're all grown up, you don't need this kind of insulin in your bloodstream. And that's what a fatty acid looks like. Surprisingly, of course, it's also made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but sugars are in ring form, and a fatty acid is packed like this. Many, many carbons. On one side, the carbon is attached to 3 hydrogen atoms, and on the other side, it's attached to 1 hydrogen and 2 oxygen. This end is called the methyl end, and this end is called the carboxyl end. And this is a very unique property of fats. So all your fats are made of these fatty acids. And you notice between the carbons, there's 1 line. Everyone see that? So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbons is caproic acid, which is present in goat milk and goat butter. This is myristic acid, which is present in coconut oil and palm oil, and that's 14 carbons. This is 6 carbons. And there are small carbon fatty acids and there are large carbon fatty acids. The small carbon fatty acids are very easy to digest. And butter and ghee and lard and tallow have a lot of these. Coconut oil has a lot of the small carbon fatty acids.
How about pasteurized milk? I mean, is pasteurized milk more difficult to digest?
Yes, yes. Pasteurized milk is much more difficult to digest, and the way it is cooked, the way it is made, is a process that takes away the inherently good qualities of milk. It is processed between 2 extremely hot plates at 180 to 280 degrees Fahrenheit, and milk it's like blood. It has these beautiful proteins that look like ribbons, and the body recognizes every one of those proteins when you drink raw milk because it's in the same form it was in when it came from the cow or mother's milk. But pasteurized milk proteins get denatured. They get slammed between these 2 hot plates, and they go through 5 miles of hot pipes, tanks, which are cleaned with very carcinogenic chemicals. So the process of processing milk has made it very refined and has made it a very toxic beverage. So you will see a gallon of raw milk and a gallon of pasteurized milk, but they're very, very different. They're very, very different. Raw milk has bacteria in it. Raw milk has macrophages. It has lymphocytes in it that wander around. These are cells. The fat is in the form of fat cells, and when it goes into your body can recognize that fat cell. But when the proteins are torn into shreds, you get an allergic response. Your body doesn't recognize those. And it's very hard for that calcium to be assimilated into your body. You will find that if you drink raw milk, your bones thicken. You get people are cured, their bone density increases. But with pasteurized milk, the calcium lands in your soft tissue and in your arteries. Instead, with raw milk, it lands in your bones. So the body knows how to it comes with the globulins that are used to ferry those minerals across to the appropriate place in the body. So refined oils, refined milk, refined grains are the very opposite of the grain or the fat or the milk the way nature made it. But there's good news. In Marin, we've got all sorts of herd shares. You can join a Ronald herd share. Strauss milk is not horribly pasteurized. It's pasteurized to 160 degrees, and it's done gently. And there's another process called homogenization that makes it much worse, which is like passing it through a Vitamix. And they do it to take the cream line away from the milk, so you don't know how much cream is in the milk. But it's a marketing tactic. It has nothing to do with health or shelf life or anything, but it really destroys the milk. So between pasteurization and homogenization, your milk today is not what it was in 1950 when it came in those bottles. Anyone remember bottles? It would be dropped at your doorsteps and there'd be milk floating on top, cream floating on top. That was real milk, and you just drank it. So milk contains a lot of these fatty acids, and those are beautiful, beautiful fatty acids that are carried in cells, and fat cells, which is why it floats to the top. And when you move your bottle, it homogenizes very easily. Whereas with pasteurized milk, the cream turns into a clot at the top. Cream kind of congeals. And so there's a big difference between various types of fat that are refined and unrefined. Saturated versus monounsaturated. So pretend all those corners are carbons. With those, in the first chain of carbons, there is only one line. There's only one line, so these are single bonds. This is a double bond, so that's a monounsaturated fat. That's a saturated fat, and this is a polyunsaturated fat. So anytime you have a single bond between two carbons in that entire fatty acids, it's called a saturated fat. And these fats stack up really well because there's no kink in that double bond, because there's hydrogens in only one direction. So there's a charge created, and so the monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats, they're kinked, and that's what makes them liquid at room temperature. So coconut oil is primarily saturated. Olive oil is a monounsaturated oil primarily. It has oils like linoleic acid, which are one double bond, and corn oil has multiple unsaturated bonds, double bonds, and that's called a polyunsaturated one. And you want to avoid the polyunsaturated fatty acids. You want to eat the monos, which is olive, sesame, peanut, or you want to eat the saturated fats, which are things like the animal fats, coconut oil, palm oil. One of the problems with eating polyunsaturated fats like corn oil and all these other oils, vegetable oils, is they are very long chain fatty acids and they have a lot of double bonds in them. So if you don't feed your body the fats that it needs, your body needs about 65% saturated fats, 30-35% monounsaturated fats, and 2-3% polyunsaturated fats. Guess what we're feeding our body today?
90%.
Yes. Today, people are eating 90+% polyunsaturated fats, but your body is going to take them and convert them into what it needs. Or, at some point, it runs out of the enzymes that are needed for the conversion process. And that's what gives you the floppy cell walls. And so what you want to do is eat what you are as much as possible, so you're not putting a strain on your body. And you are about 65% saturated fats, about 30-35% monounsaturated fats, and 2-3% polyunsaturated fats. So you don't even need to make an attempt to eat polyunsaturated fats because you'll get them through your food. And you should eat those polyunsaturated forms in food. Eat the corn, not the corn oil, because the corn oil is very fragile and gets rancid, whereas the corn, your body can extract the oil it needs out of it on its own. But because we have this imbalance of oils, of non-saturated oils versus saturated oils, our body has an enormous burden of conversion. And that's what causes inflammation, when you cannot convert it, when you run out of enzymes, when it's too much, when your cell walls are floppy, minerals or nutrients, nourishment, oxygen, sodium, potassium cannot travel back and forth through your cell the way it would if it was a healthy cell wall. And that's sort of an example of all the enzymes that you need to saturate and desaturate your body's oils and fats. So animal fats contain stearic acid. There's a lot of stearic acid in tallow or lard. Oleic acid is the next acid. It contains one double bond, and that's olive oil. Linoleic is like corn oil, so it has two double bonds. And linolenic acid, an example is flaxseed oil or fish oils contain linolenic acid. So do you see how the fat with no double bonds is straight? It's straight, and so it's tack substrate, and so you will find that saturated fatty acids are solid at room temperature. The monounsaturated, the polyunsaturated are very liquid at room temperature. And that's because they have many double bonds. What's a trans fatty acid? So what they did was, so the first example is a saturated fatty acid, which has no double bonds. So the carbons are stacked straight. The second one is an oleic acid, which is got one double bond. And one double bond is causing those two hydrogens to, because they're the same charge, they're pushing away from each other. So there's a kink in that oil. So what you do with the to convert a cis acid into a trans acid, you pass that oil over a nickel catalyst, pass hydrogen through the oil on a nickel catalyst at very, very high temperatures. And that's how you can turn cottonseed oil into Crisco. So what's happening really is it's still a double bond, but you're moving one hydrogen down and one hydrogen on top so that it's tacking up into a solid fat. So this is a very popular fat with bakers. In croissants now they're putting in trans fatty acids. Used to be butter croissants, so do watch and ask your bakers if they're putting in only butter. But what this has done for bakers is it has the property of a butter, but it is a man-made oil, and the body finds it to be very toxic. But it's a liquid oil that's turned solid by passing it over a nickel catalyst at very high temperatures in a hydrogen chamber. Trans fatty acid is now known to cause heart disease. It's supposed to be labeled on snacks and foods, but a lot of it goes in, and a lot of it is created in the McDonald's oils and fats. When you're making fries and vegetable oils, there's a lot of trans fatty acid creation. Did you have a question? Did you have a question at one point?
I forgot. Oh, no, this was when we were talking about milk.
Oh,
Bacteria. Why pregnant women cannot drink raw milk.
Oh, that is the pregnant women for thousands of years have drunk nothing but raw milk.
Mm-hmm.
It is only in the last 40 years that our doctors have told us. I advise all pregnant women to drink a quart of raw milk every day, cut all the vitamins, especially iron, and the fluoridated vitamins, which are deadly for your infant and for you. Raw milk contains everything a woman would need to have a healthy pregnancy, a healthy baby. Loads of calcium, loads of glutathione. It's just, it's a very good food. So, yeah, but they do say that. Cis and trans fatty acids. So a cis fatty acid is a regular polyunsaturated or an unsaturated fatty acid with the hydrogens on one side, and by pushing the hydrogen to the other side, you just created a trans fatty acid. And the problem is your body does not recognize the trans fatty acid, so it will absorb that. If you give it Crisco, your body will eat it, but when that goes into your cell walls, it creates dead zones. So that's where chemical interactions cannot happen. And these oils are very hard to get out of your cell membranes. The good news is you're constantly regenerating your body. So if you had a diet of trans fatty acids or polyunsaturated fats, within about, I'm going to say, a year to 2.5 years, you will get all of that displaced with good oils and fats. But it takes time because, you know, your different organs, your liver will take 2 years to regenerate, your skin a few days, your alimentary canal a few days, your nails a few months, etc. So you wanna avoid things that bring trans fatty acids into your body, because that is the root cause of chronic disease and inflammation. So think of the double bonds as knives. Think of them as knives in your body that cause oxidative stress, because the hydrogen's there. That bond is very unstable, and it's always trying to grab a hydrogen or it's trying to have a reaction at that point. And so linoleic, linolenic acid, that's a monounsaturated fat, that's a it has got 2 double bonds, and a linoleic, so that's flaxseed oil. These are fragile oils, and you want to eat these in food form, not as oils.
So not even if you're not heating them up, they're still not.
Yes, they're not natural. Mankind did not eat those. You want to eat oils from seeds that if you press the seed, oil comes out. Sesame, peanut, these are seed oils where you can cold press them. Corn, if you press corn, nothing comes out. And corn has about 5% oil, so it's chemically extracted with carcinogenic chemicals like hexane. And so this is not an expeller extraction, it's a chemical extraction. And that's what makes it very toxic to your body. So if you have corn oil, Wesson oil, vegetable oils, canola, soy oil, these are just deadly, deadly oils.
What did you say about peanut oil?
Peanut oil, if you can find cold pressed peanut oil, cold pressed sesame oil, those are good oils because they're extracted by mechanical forces, not chemical, but not with chemicals. So these are a few examples of oil. So stearic acid is 18 carbons. Oleic acid, which is your primary oil in olive oil, is 18. It's got 1 double bond. Linoleic has got 2 double bonds. Can you see the double bonds there? EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid. So these are the fish oils, and your brain has a lot of very long chain fatty acids with many, many double bonds. But guess what? They're inside your brain, so they cannot get oxidized. They're very protected, and the brain makes it on the go as it needs them. So you don't want to eat them. You want to eat stable oils and let your body manufacture the unstable oils on an as-needed basis. I got this off the internet, and the reds are the saturated parts, and they're painted red because the dietary guidelines are saying these are the oils to avoid, and the blues are the oils to eat. I would say go from the bottom left-hand corner and go towards the right. So your coconut oil has 92% saturated fats and only 8% unsaturated fats. Butter has about 68% saturated fat and only 30% unsaturated fats, and so on down the road. Here's olive oil. You'll notice olive oil is a funny oil. It has monounsaturated fats, 76%. It has 15% saturated fats, which makes it a good oil in that it's not polyunsaturated. All the others on the right-hand side are polyunsaturated fats, and you want to eat them in their seed form. So you want to eat a walnut. You want to eat a walnut instead of extracting oil from the walnut, or sunflowers, or safflowers, or some of the other oils. Canola is a lot like olive oil. You will notice it has almost 70% monounsaturated fat. This is the far corner here. But it is made from grapeseed, the old mustard seed, and it's a genetically modified oil. So I would not recommend it. I would recommend local fats, rendered, and it works out to be, $7 a pound for.
To make extra and
Yes,
go away?
yes. Then you can put them, they'll last for several months in the refrigerator or in the freezer for best
but never, it cannot stay unopened or in the counter.
If you're using it, it can stay open and on the counter for up to a month, I would say, in my house, if your house is hot, maybe a little bit less than a month. But definitely a jar like that can stay on the counter for several weeks.
So how, did you say cook it 20 to 45 minutes?
So we start, what's the time right now?
No, that's too long. So like an hour and
Okay.
25 minutes?
Hour and 25 on that electric. On one of my gas stoves, it's 45 minutes. On the other gas stove, it's 45 minutes. One is 25 and the other is 45. And this was an electric burner, so I don't have a good gauge of it. But do it on the lowest setting and then check to make sure it's golden, not dark brown like that was. And then you're done.
So that's the thing you look and see if when the colours change.
And when the colors change, strain it off on very low heat. It's as simple as that, and it'll bring good health to your life.
What kind of olive oil do you use?
I tend to get it from the farmers here. I do not get the foreign oils unless you have a really good source and you know the farmer and all that. Kirkland, surprisingly, Kirkland olive oil has been tested by UC Davis, and it's the real deal. So
But
Costco,
the organic extra virgin.
the organic extra virgin cold pressed olive oil, yes,
Organic.
first press.
And then when I see the word lard up there,
Mm-hmm.
are you talking like Nutiva makes a lard?
This pig fat rendered.
So you're talking about the real lard,
Yes.
not,
Nutiva makes the lard from pig.
so that would be okay.
If it was organic and cold, organically raised pig.
Okay.
Yes.
But the Nutella, I understand, it makes a vegetable version of. It's not really lard. It's what do you call it? It's like lard, but it's made out of vegetables.
Oh, Nutiva is? I
No,
did not know.
the product that Nutella makes, they have type. I understand, something that is used for cooking that is from vegetables, but it behaves like lard.
Oh,
That's
so
what I
it's not
understand.
real lard.
So I didn't know that. So would you not use that unless I know what vegetables they're?
Yes. Why would they call a vegetable oil lard?
You know what, I thought it was, no, because I thought it was,
It's a shortening. It's
It's a
just a vegetable
oh, so
shortening.
that's
Okay.
different? Is that a different?
Oh, okay. Lard is from the pig, tallow is from cow, butter is butter, and the key is rendered butter. Palm oil, the red oil.
Right.
Soybean, avoid sesame, you get great sesame oil. Or eat sesame seeds, or eat walnuts and almonds and so forth. Olive oil, be careful and get it tested. Look at the UC Davis report, Google the UC Davis report. But I would say if you want to cook in a heat stable fat. And then the monounsaturated oils you can use for salads because you're not cooking them. And if you use expeller pressed oils, you're getting all the polyphenols and the antioxidants and the vitamins.
So what about McAvoy in Petaluma?
Yes, that's a very good farm. Yeah. They have their own oil.
Why do you use unsalted butter? What if you use salted butter?
For the ghee,
Yeah.
no problem. The salt will fall to the bottom.
Okay, so you end up with the same product?
Yeah, it's I just don't use salted butter because I want my ghee to be unsalted because I salt my vegetables or whatever dish I'm making. Which you could make it from salted butter if you wanted to. No problem.
I feel like there are different levels of coconut oil too. I was just visiting my mother-in-law and she had some really nasty looking coconut oil. that
Yes,
smelled
there's refined coconut
terrible.
oils. Yeah. So you want to go for the cold pressed. They call them virgin, which is a marketing euphemism for I don't understand what. So you want cold pressed and organic as much as
What about
possible.
whole kernel?
It is always whole kernel.
Because you go and I think it's the Dr. Bronner's is a lot more expensive. It's whole kernel, and I ask people, well, so what's the difference between these oils? And
All
when
coconut
they
oil.
know, all of them is whole kernel.
Yeah, all coconut is whole kernel. You want the cold pressed and the organically grown coconut.
You had
Not
mentioned
refined.
fish oils. What about omega-3s? Are those needed?
They are.
In what
Eat
form?
3 servings of fish a week. You'll get all the omega you need. I make this flaxseed chutney. Toast some flax seeds, add some cayenne, raw garlic and such to it, grind it up, throw that on everything you eat. you'll get, if you eat a couple of tablespoons of flaxseed every day, you will get your omega-3s. You could eat anchovies, you could eat raw fish, you could eat salmon, you'll get all
Helps
those.
that again, helps out the seeds, you just said?
The flaxseed, you toast them, you can add sesame seeds to them. So 1 part flaxseed, 1 part sesame seed, 1 part shredded coconut unsweetened.
Hang on.
Toast them, grind them up with garlic, cayenne, salt, kelp, seaweed, toasted seaweed. And it's a wonderful, wonderful condiment you can throw on anything.
So you said 1 part flax, 1 part sesame.
1 part sesame, 1 part shredded coconut, unsweetened, toasted, add some seaweed to it, raw garlic, grind it with cayenne. It's delicious.
Toasting, does not kill the
The
omega-3?
toasting will not kill the omega-3 because you're toasting the whole seed, which has got a very thick skin. It'll just make it very grindable. And
What kind of seaweed and raw garlic and then what?
raw garlic, cayenne, salt.
Okay.
Raw garlic, cayenne, salt. Everyone should have one of these on their counter, and then you can just
And the seaweed, what kind do you mean?
any kind, just
Okay.
toasted seaweed. So you're getting some iodine along with your omega-3s. It's very, very, very delicious and very healthy. So now we kind of know that the more saturated fat, so butter is not all, as you can see here, butter is not 100% saturated fat. It's got some monounsaturated, some polyunsaturated. It's got conjugated linoleic acid, which is and it has got some trans fatty acids, which our body actually recognizes and loves. So these are nature-made trans fatty acids that butter has that are actually cancer-fighting, conjugated linoleic acids. So all these fats are made up of a bunch of different types of fatty acids, but you want to stick to the red corner. You want to eat the red corner and you want to avoid the blue corner. So the more saturated fats are butter, meat, fat, coconut oil, which are solid at room temperatures. You know why? Because there's a single bond between them. The more unsaturated fats have double bonds, and hence they're more liquid at room temperature. The monounsaturated get frozen solid in a refrigerator because they only have 1 double bond. And now we come to cholesterol, which is a super important component of the human body. Your cell membranes, 40% cholesterol. All your vitamin D is made from cholesterol. Your hormones, your bile is made from cholesterol. All your bile acids, your cognition. Try and take cholesterol out of your diet. I was dumb enough to do it at my doctor's advice. My doctor said my cholesterol levels were too. This is what started this journey of health research for me. My doctor said your cholesterol levels at 228 are way too high, and wanted to put me on statins, the Kaiser doctor. And I said, no, I don't want to do pills. I will eat oatmeal because I knew that oatmeal takes the bile out of your body. Bile is cholesterol, and that would reduce my cholesterol levels. Well, guess what happened? My cholesterol levels went from 228 to 180, but in the process, I would get every single office flu, cough, cold, influenza. My skin became wrinkled, and I could remember telephone numbers like 10 at a shot, and I completely lost my memory. My hormones went down the toilet, and that is when I Googled. Google is man's best friend, and is cholesterol good for you? And that's when I read like 2 feet stacks of journal papers on cholesterol, and realized that this anti-cholesterol movement was one big con. Started eating raw butter, ghee, raw milk, and instantaneously my health improved.
So oatmeal's not good for you, or just?
Oatmeal's in the quantities I was eating to take out my cholesterol is bad for you. Oatmeal is a carbohydrate, so if you have insulin resistance, consider less oatmeal, more eggs, more ground beef patties, more vegetables, and make oatmeal part of your life, but not a huge part of your life.
The bile that you have mentioned there, are you talking about bile like the liver is
Mhm.
making?
Liver produces the bile that comes into your gallbladder. Every time there's fat, it squirts a squirt of bile, and that's what emulsifies your
And
fats.
that's cholesterol?
That's made from cholesterol. And it gets recycled. So when I eat fats and bile gets squirted in my lower intestines, it all gets reabsorbed, so I don't lose my cholesterol, except when you eat fiber like oatmeal. When you evacuate it out, it absorbs the bile and it gets pushed out. So if you're eating a lot of oatmeal, like morning and night, likely is not, you're losing cholesterol, and that's bad for you.
So did your cholesterol go down eating raw, butter, raw, everything?
No, it went back up and my health improved. So high cholesterol is in my view a big scam. The fact that high cholesterol, or the science that high cholesterol causes problems or gives you heart attacks is incorrect, because Americans have had cholesterol levels of between 200 and 250. What they did in the 70s was they moved that number to the left so that more people could be prescribed statins, and it created a 20% of the population then became high cholesterol because they moved the markers way back to the left. My cholesterol, my natural and normal cholesterol levels are between 225 and 280, and cholesterol levels must change as your circumstances change. Cholesterol is a very antimicrobial substance, so when you have a fever, your cholesterol shoots through the roof. When you're taking a final exam, your cholesterol levels go up. Why? Because your adrenaline level, your stress hormones increase. Stress hormones are made from cholesterol. So if you have a student that's on a low cholesterol diet, taking final or semester, these kids that jumped out of windows in MIT at exam time, these were kids on low cholesterol, low salt diets. You need cholesterol to cope with stress, to have children, to have testosterone, to have libido. Your libido will go out the window if you have low cholesterol. People with low cholesterol are violent, tend to be much more violent. The suicide rate goes through the roof, and heart attacks, heart failure goes through the roof on low cholesterol, because your heart needs cholesterol to operate.
And we're probably like not one number fits all.
And one
more
number,
individual.
exactly. And we'll talk a little bit about the sort of the deception that was done with the numbers in the Framingham study that declared that cholesterol was bad for your health. But this is the cholesterol molecule, and it's awesome and very good for you, and it's a critical component of everything that happens in your body. It's a sterol, and it's like a waxy, waterproof substance. It makes your cells waterproof, so that there's different chemistry outside of the cell and different chemistry on the inside of the cell. And when you don't have enough cholesterol, that chemistry gets messed up. It's nature's healing substance. So if you eat a lot of carbohydrates, and if you eat polyunsaturated fats, which are like daggers in your arteries, guess what cholesterol's role is? Cholesterol repairs your arteries. It's like a fire truck at the scene of the fire, and you're saying cholesterol is the enemy just because it happens to be at the scene of the crime. So it's a very strong repair substance. If you get a wound here, cholesterol comes right up. Your cells manufacture cholesterol, and it acts as a healing substance to heal the scars and the wounds. It gives structural integrity to your cells. It's the precursor to vitamin D. So if you have cholesterol in your body and you're walking in the sun, your cholesterol in tandem with sunlight makes something called cholesterol sulfate, and it makes vitamin D. So without cholesterol, you'd be dead. Children born without the ability to make cholesterol are children with this symptom called Smith-Lemli-Opitz syndrome, SLOS, and they die within the first few months of life because it's needed for brain development. Your bile salts are made from cholesterol. All your hormones are made from cholesterol. It's a very powerful antioxidant, and it protects your body against free radicals. And your brain and nervous system in particular is one of the most essential things for it. So your cholesterol makes pregnenolone, progesterone, your menstruation hormone, your pregnancy hormone, DHEA, testosterone, estradiol is made from all your blood sugar and blood pressure regulating hormones are all made from cholesterol. If you go on a low cholesterol diet, it'll affect everything from your libido to your glucose regulation to your blood pressure. Vitamin A is needed for each conversion here. So you need to have vitamin A, which is present in ghee, butter, cream, and all the animal fats, saturated animal fats. And trans fatty acids inhibit the enzymes that make these conversions. So you will find that men will frequently have low testosterone or women will have low progesterone, and that's from having frequently, when they change their diet to good fats, that changes, and women become fertile, testosterone levels go up. And your cholesterol levels are going to vary. They can go up as much as 20%. So if my normal cholesterol levels are, say, 250, they can go up and down by 50 points in the course of a day, depending on my stress levels, my hormone levels, my body's needs, etc. And so when you measure your cholesterol just once at a doctor's, that's not a very good or accurate reading of what your true cholesterol status is. And in women, elderly women or women over 50 in particular, higher cholesterol portends longevity. All the women who are long-lived have higher cholesterol levels than women who have low cholesterol levels. Men, the same thing after 60, slightly greater risk of coronary disease for levels above 300. Not many people have levels above 300. The norm is between 200 and 275, and that's pretty consistent across our population. There are certain races and tribes that have very low cholesterol levels, but they have adapted to their foods and their circumstances. So cholesterol levels vary across cultures, across latitudes, and are based on the foods you eat, but cholesterol has almost nothing to do with heart disease. There are some studies, Ravenscoff, the cholesterol, no study has shown that elevated LDL is a problem. HDL protects against cardiovascular disease. There are greater deaths at low cholesterol levels. Many studies have shown that so cholesterol levels all cause deaths, especially deaths from cancer, are higher for individuals with cholesterol levels lower than 180 because cholesterol is an anti-cancer substance. Oxidized cholesterol in natural food does not cause, cholesterol itself does not cause heart disease, it's the oxidized cholesterol. Milk powder, egg powder, the egg beaters, all these processed foods that, because cholesterol can get oxidized. Cholesterol lowering drugs do not lower the risk of heart disease, but they increase your risk of cancer, intestinal disease, especially notice people who have been on statins for 10 years, at the 10-year mark, they get colon cancer or some other cancer. Intestinal diseases, depression, suicide, and violent behavior at low cholesterol levels. Men in particular, if a man in your life is depressed, feed him 2 eggs or 4 eggs every day for breakfast. Get their cholesterol levels up. Frequently a sign of depression. This was a study that was done in 1957, and it was, they called it the Anti-Coronary Club, and that is when Ansel Keys' prudent diet came into being. How are we doing for time? You're okay? You guys are okay? Okay. So there's a group of 1,100 New York businessmen, age 40 to 49, who were placed on 2 different types of diets. One was the standard American diet of the time, which was butter, eggs, and beef in the morning. And one was the prudent diet, which was corn oil or margarine, cold breakfast cereal, and chicken and fish. So that was the prudent diet. Those prudent dieters got 30% more polyunsaturated fats than the controls. So the control group of that age ate eggs for breakfast and meat 3 times a day, which was the practice in those days. this was in 1957. In 1966, right? 9 years later, the prudent dieters had average serum cholesterol levels of 220 compared to the controls, whose level was 250, like mine. So the prudent dieters, who were in a low cholesterol or a polyunsaturated fat diet, had lower cholesterol levels. But guess what happened? There were 8 deaths from heart disease among the prudent dieter group and none among the controls. 8 deaths from heart disease among the prudent dieters whose cholesterol levels were lower than the controls. They then canceled it. The NHLBI they canceled that study because too many people had died, and they said, this is not a big enough sample size. 1,100 is not big enough. Let us organize a bigger sample size. And so they got a national diet heart study with 1 million men to compare the prudent diet with the one high in meat and fat, and they started to do a pilot on that study, and in the pilot showed the same rate of death of the prudent dieters versus the regular eaters, and the study was abandoned. This was in 1968. And remember, the new food pyramid was established a mere 7 or 8 years after that, saying we should be on a prudent diet. A 5-year evaluation in 1962 of that showed that the polyunsaturated people had lower total cholesterol, they had lower total blood pressure, they had lost weight. This was called a success, even though Norman Jolliffe, he was the head of the study, had himself already died of a heart attack in 1961, eating that very same diet. Then we look at the 10-year evaluation. 26 members of the prudent dieters had died by 1967. Only 6 members of the control group had died. So 4 times more deaths in the prudent dieters than in the controls. The anti-coronary club was intended to prevent heart attacks, but it actually caused more heart attacks. And the whole effort was then disbanded. There was another study in 1965 where patients who had already had a heart attack were divided into 3 groups. So these are people who already had 1 heart attack. They're put into 3 groups. One group was fed polyunsaturated oils with 2 or more double bonds. Remember, 2 or more double bonds. The second group was given monounsaturated, which is olive oil with 1 double bond. And the third group ate saturated fats, which is ghee, lard, tallow, butter, etc. The corneal group had 30% lower cholesterol, but only 52% were alive after 2 years. The animal fat group, 75% of the people were alive after 2 years. 52 versus 75. So the mortality rate in the polyunsaturated group was 20% higher than the saturated fat group. But there was a lot of, at that time, Nixon passed the rule saying nobody shall go hungry, make food cheap, farmers were subsidized massively, and corn and canola oil came into being. And these industries put a lot of pressure on Congress and on the government to create food guidelines that promoted a lot of the polyunsaturated fats. And I'm not going to go through all of this except to say that there's a revolving door between the FDA and the Monsantos and the oil companies and so on. And that has a lot to do with the policy making of the FDA. And that's where the genesis of the food pyramid was. They put a lot of pressure, Procter & Gamble put a lot of pressure on the American Heart Association to change its diet heart statement, removing any reference to trans fatty acids. And there's a lipid biochemist by the name of Mary Enick whose career was destroyed because she was saying that trans fatty acids cause heart attacks. She was a University of Maryland lipid biochemist, and if you get a chance, read a book by her called Know Your Fats, Mary Enick. She's my great hero, and it's because of her efforts over 30 years that trans fats finally became abolished in our processed foods.
Mary who?
ENIG. And so they altered a lot of the guidelines and documents word by word by word. There was a lot of backroom control. The people who were the scientists were shunted out of their jobs. They did not get funding if they did not promote these vegetable oils. So the edible oil industry played a big role in bringing about this epidemic of polyunsaturated oils and heart disease. And so back in 1962, when the doctors ran the American Medical Association, they said the anti-fat, anti-cholesterol fat is not just foolish and futile, it also carries some risk, because they had seen all these studies. Scientific reports linking cholesterol and heart attacks have touched off a new food fad among do-it-yourself Americans, but dieters who believe they can cut down on their blood cholesterol without medical supervision are in for a rude awakening. It cannot be done. It could be dangerous to try. This is what they said in 1962, and by 1975, all of these words had been erased. And so they changed, what they changed was they said the cholesterol levels in 1972-73, in preparation for creating a cholesterol-based industry, they said the average serum level of cholesterol in most American men and women is undesirably elevated. So what for centuries had been our cholesterol levels, unmeasured by mankind, all of a sudden became abnormal. And it is important to lower the cholesterol levels in the blood. In order to do that, you must measure them. So that created a whole industry for measuring your cholesterol levels. And then it created an industry that took down the cholesterol levels. So the dietary advice was Americans in this risky category should receive appropriate dietary advice, which is the dietary advice that I received. Gee, your cholesterol levels are too high. I was in a very stressful assignment. Of course my cholesterol levels were high. I needed the hormones to cope with my stress. Reduce the saturated fats. Americans in risk categories should reduce intake of saturated fat by substituting it with polyunsaturated fats, the same oils that cause a 20% increase in heart disease in the anti-coronary club. Processed foods, they were modified and ordinary. They were now labeled as modified and ordinary foods useful for this purpose, and they should be readily available in the market, reasonably priced and easily identified by appropriate labels. Any existing legal and regulatory barriers to the marketing of such foods should be removed. So what used to be called imitation foods or imitation milk or imitation cheese in the 1930s came to be called as milk, and the labeling was changed and to allow that. So Americans were greatly deceived into eating foods that were homogenized, pasteurized, refined, and thinking of them as foods that were good for them, and with labels that call them heart healthy. Cheerios are anything but heart healthy. And in the Federal Food and Drug Act of 1938, they knew that there are certain traditional food that everyone knows, such as bread, milk, cheese, and when they consumers buy these foods, they should get exactly those foods. If a food resembles a standardized food but does not comply with the standard, it must be labeled as imitation. In the 1973 guidelines, they removed the imitation label, and they called it cheese. So Kraft cheese, which makes that plasticky cheese which burns and which doesn't burn in a fire, was allowed to call it cheese. And what they said was, the regulation defined inferiority as any reduction in content of an essential nutrient that's present at a level of 2% or more of the USRDA. So raw milk, folks, contains not thousands, but hundreds of thousands of nutrients that are less than 2%, but you can take that raw milk, you can refine it, and you can add in the nutrients lost that were 2% or more and say that it is still milk. You're now allowed to do that. Whereas in 1938, it would have been called pasteurized milk or imitation milk or homogenized milk. And so by changing the rules, the gullible public was very deceived by the guidelines. And many, many, many women and family cooks were deceived into thinking margarine was good, corn oil was better for your child, and the processed bread was good for them. And cereals were health food. And so there's a lot of things that were done. The lipid hypothesis, which was false, the scientists and dissenting testimony was never heard. The final report did not take into account the increases in cancer from some of the studies. Independent analysis was never used. And the medical profession at this time was very skeptical of this data, but in due course, the medical profession's hands became tied. And there are a few brave doctors who come out today and talk about saturated fats and low carbohydrate diets, but they're few and far between, and they are in danger of getting their licenses taken for saying that. This was the Framingham study. Has everyone heard of the famous Framingham study? This was the study that determined that saturated fats and cholesterol cause heart disease. And this is how they did it. This is Dr. William Cannell, who said that that total plasma cholesterol is a powerful predictor of death related to coronary heart disease. And if you looked at this graph, you will see that it pops up all of a sudden at that point. You see that line popping up? At about 265 to 294, it pops up steeply, and it starts going up at around 200. And so what they said was, gee, the coronary heart disease events per 1,000 were about 8, and they go up to about 16 at 300. But do you see a problem with this graph? On the x-axis, you will see that the increments are very different for different numbers. Remember your statistics from high school? If on the x-axis you're writing numbers, they have to have the same increments. Here, the first interval is 120, the second interval is 30, 30, 30, and the fourth interval is 830. If you plot them out in the same increments, this is what the graph looks like. There's no increase in death from increases in cholesterol at all until you literally reach levels of 1,000. If you make the intervals 100 each. So the actual rate of increase between 182 and 244 milligrams per deciliter of cholesterol is 0.13, which is minuscule. They use a concept called relative risk to make that number much bigger by comparing it to another number, which is not an absolute risk, but a relative risk. And I'll tell you that in very simple terms. Suppose the rate of breast cancer from eating this bad food is 1 in a billion, right? The rate of breast cancer from eating this bad food is 1 in a billion. That's a very low rate of breast cancer, right? Now, suppose you eat this other food, which increases your rate of breast cancer from 1 to 2 in a billion. Is that appreciable rates of cancer? That's practically no cancer. But the second food is causing cancer at the rate of 2 in a billion, whereas the first food caused cancer at the rate of 1 in a billion. Therefore, the second food is 100 times riskier than the first food. But in real terms, both these foods do not really cause breast cancer, because 1 in a billion and 2 in a billion is very, very, very low rate of breast cancer, almost nothing. But when you compare two different endpoints, midpoints, then the rate appears to be much bigger. And that is how they came up with the risk of 240% increased risk between 182 and 244. The absolute risk was 0.13, but the relative risk between 182 and 240 was 240%. That is lying and cheating with numbers. This is just sort of explains the absolute versus relative risk. And the same thing was done in the breast cancer trials as well. So they had two groups of patients. They put one group of patients on a statin, which is the drug, Lipitor, etc., that takes down your blood cholesterol levels. And they were trying to test the effect of statin on breast cancer, and so, or death from heart attack. So there were 96 of the 2,000 patients, or thereabouts, died from heart attacks in the statin group. These were people that were fed statins, and 119 people died of heart attack in the control group. These are the people who did not get the statin. So there's a minor increase in death from heart disease as a result of not taking a statin. But look what happened to breast cancer. 13 women got breast cancer from eating statins, whereas only one woman out of 286 got breast cancer in the non-statin group, right? But so the absolute risk of breast cancer from statins was 4.2%, and the absolute risk of death from heart attacks were minus 1.1%, meaning the statins did a lot more harm than good. But if you cherry pick, if you take the relative risk if you take the absolute risk from death from heart attack, and you take the relative risk from breast cancer, you can say that the risk of heart attacks, or relative risk from heart attacks, you can say the risk from heart attacks goes down 19% from eating statins, and it goes up only 4.2% from the breast cancer. So therefore, it's better to eat statins than to not eat statins. But if you look at the real data, if you look at the absolute risk, the death from heart attacks was only 1% lower, but the death from breast cancers was 4% higher. But by looking at relative risk versus absolute risk, you can turn the numbers around. If you want to take a moment to think about that. And a lot of studies are like that. So you have to look at the actual real data, which shows you who actually died or what actually happened.
And who does the research and who's profiting from the results.
Exactly. And many scientists will report the results faithfully, but then in the summary section they'll do something to appease the edible oil industry or appease whoever, pharmaceuticals. And you have to look at the real numbers to see who actually died and who didn't die from the statin. This is the director of the Framingham study. It was a multi-year study over several generations and still carrying on to see the effect of cholesterol and saturated fatty acids on heart disease. And what he wrote after he retired, he could write that while he was still working there. In 1992, in the Archives of Internal Medicine, William Castelli, the director of the Framingham study, wrote, "In Framingham, Massachusetts, the more saturated fat one ate, the more cholesterol one ate, the more calories one ate, the lower people's serum cholesterol. We found that the people who ate the most cholesterol, ate the most saturated fat, ate the most calories, weighed the least, and were the most physically active." Because they were eating more fats than they were eating carbohydrates. Here's a multiple risk factor intervention trial, Mr. Fit trial, for 362,000 men, and below are the cholesterol levels. You will note that the highest rate of coronary events were found in those taking blood pressure lowering medications, the ones on the left. And this is the median cholesterol levels. There is no particular reason to say this is an ideal level, or this is an ideal level, or this is an ideal level. As a matter of fact, total deaths on low cholesterol levels went up rather steeply, and there's not an appreciable difference on the high side. There was another trial conducted by the Lipid Research Clinic's coronary primary prevention trial. It was the LRC CPPT in 1984. It cost us taxpayers $150 million. This was a drug trial. One group was on cholesterol-lowering drugs and one was on placebo. The results were that the group taking the drug had 17% reduction in coronary heart disease, but independent researchers, when they actually looked at the data, discovered that there's no difference in coronary heart disease between the drug and placebo groups. Heart disease. Average cholesterol reduction was 8.5%, which led to the oft-repeated statement by Rifkind, which is for each 1% reduction in cholesterol, which we can expect a 2% reduction in heart disease. But with each 1% decrease in cholesterol, you can expect an 11% increase in death from all causes. That was the unsaid part. The side effects were that the group taking the drug had increases in deaths from cancer, stroke, violence, and suicide. And those were not counted in the study because it was looking only at heart disease. So that's the sort of thing that happens routinely. And then the media, popular press said this was the proof that statins reduce the chances of heart disease, but they didn't point out that statins increase the chance of all-cause mortality, death from other causes, by a vastly larger number. And 30 years later, when Framingham was revisited, investigators looked at the participants, and this was in the JAMA Journal 1987,